Thank you for joining second day of the 2021 KRIBB Annual Conference. So, okay, I think it's there is some technical problems. So anyway, so today our session is for GloPID-R sessions. So GloPID-R stand for 이거 네, 이 스피커 끌 수 있죠. 네. So GloPID-R is a global research collaboration for infectious disease populations. So this project is supported by Ministry of Science and ICT. So I'm charged for PI for this project. Actually, this project is really important in this situation. Korean government already get started with corona strategy. So, but right now, as you may know, Omicron is already appear and spread out very rapidly. So this really, serious situation right now. In this kind of a current situation, this is a really very fitable project and topic for these sessions. Today we have the very profound five speakers about this international network project. Especially the first speaker, I'm really glad to introduce. Her name is Charu Kausek, who is president of the GloPID-R. She is science director of Canadian Institute of Health Research Institute of Infection and Immunity. She is like a godfather of the GloPID-R. She manages everything, and as I discussed a little bit a second ago, she is really busy because we need manage a lot of the issue, especially the Omicron variant is already occur and spread out all over the world. So she will present about introduction of the GloPID-R. Please give her a big hand for her presentation. Okay, Charu, can you hear me?
Can. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's your time, and please.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not echoing. Is everything going okay then?
내가 안 들려.
Okay, good. So thanks, Chumin, for that very kind introduction, and I appreciate the chance to speak at this KRIBB Annual Conference. It's my great pleasure to be here and to set the stage for what's coming up next in terms of understanding what GloPID-R is and what GloPID-R does. So I will start by sharing my slide, and hopefully you can see that. Can you confirm that you can see my slides? And hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, I can see. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So I guess I'm here for next 15 minutes or so to talk to you about global research collaboration for infectious disease preparedness, or in short, GloPID-R. So I will set the stage to talk to you a little bit about what's coming up next. And as Chumin pointed out, that this is the kind of organization that is so critical right now as we are almost into the third year, coming up into the third year of this global pandemic. So GloPID-R is an organization that brings together funding organizations investing in research related to new or re-emerging infectious diseases in order to increase preparedness and facilitate rapid research response during outbreaks which have pandemic potential. So as you can imagine that this particular pandemic is exactly the kind of emergency that this organization prepares for. And it really is a forum for funders to discuss with each other and coordinate with each other. So therefore, the objectives that for GloPID-R, as outlined in this slide, that is first of all to support development of research preparedness activities in order to reinforce rapid response capacity, so build a rapid response capacity during peacetime. And then during the emergency time, pandemic time, or epidemic times, to facilitate a rapid and aligned funding of research. And GloPID-R does this in collaboration with WHO and a number of other organizations, and I will get into that in a little bit more detail as I go through my slides. And the third objective of GloPID-R is really to the coordination function, to make sure that the funders are talking to each other, the funders are building relationships with other important organizations like WHO, so that during peace times and during pandemic times, there's a more coordinated response to in terms of the research that is funded. A little bit about the governance and membership of GloPID-R. So GloPID-R has 6 co-chairs, and the chair rotates. So I took over as the chair last year in October to be able to sort of expand the scope of GloPID-R. As you can see, the other co-chairs, and there is regional representation. So we're still looking to find a regional representative co-chair from the South American continent. But we have Dr. Shoji Miyagawa from Japan, Dr. Yazdan Pana from France, ANRS agency, Dr. Charles Besonge from South African MRC, Dr. Barbara Kirsteins, who is from the European Commission, and Dr. Jeremy Farrar from Wellcome Trust. The GloPID-R Secretariat is funded through the European Commission, who have supported this organization right from its inception in 2014. So GloPID-R has 32 members, and you can see on this map where all those member agencies come from, and you can see it's pretty widely spread out throughout the globe. And we are increasing that membership pretty much every month. We have more organizations joining GloPID-R. And at present, we have 5 observer organizations who are our partners and who we coordinate with, and that includes WHO, CEPI, EDCTP, Essence, and GORN. So all of these organizations, as you will note, are really the organizations that are involved in pandemic preparedness and pandemic research response. And in terms of GloPID-R's work, I wanted to highlight to you some of the working groups that are there. And these are, again, formed primarily with the participation of funders. And the focus is really to allow funders to do coordination. And with that in view, the working groups reflect the work that the funders would really like to coordinate. So therefore, starting from the bottom, you will see that there's a data sharing working group, because one of the main goals for the funders is to develop guidelines and frameworks for allowing open science and data sharing across different continents and across the globe. And in that connection, GloPID-R actually developed a roadmap for data sharing a few years ago, and this kind of provides the framework for FAIR principles and be able to apply the application of this for data sharing. The other group that I want to highlight is the social sciences working group. We've seen clearly in the current pandemic how important social behavioral research has been. And this framework, again, the work was done by this social sciences working group, and they put together this framework of a people-centered epidemic preparedness and response framework, which integrates social science research into preparing and responding to outbreaks. And then the last two groups that I will talk a little bit more in detail today, the Clinical Trials Network Working Group, which really was put together at the beginning of the GloPID-R's inception, which connects clinical trial networks. And now we are including funders into that so that the networks and funders can work together to improve coordination for clinical trials, which is so important and has really played an important role in the current pandemic. In 2019, before the pandemic started, we actually had a workshop in December of 2019, just before the pandemic broke, which really talked about the themes of what would research funding in practice look like for coordinating clinical trials globally. So, coming into the third year of the pandemic, this work is now taking momentum, and I can expand on that. And then finally, something that was identified, in the first year of the pandemic, that low and middle income countries really need to be part of the research effort and really be able to participate across the globe. And even with, the current variant outbreak with Omicron, we are seeing that the inequity around the world and not being able to provide vaccines and include low middle income countries into the vaccine equity effort is really resulting in what's really painful for everyone across the globe. So based on this, we are working very hard, especially to include the low middle income countries to make sure that they can work shoulder to shoulder in terms of being prepared for pandemics and dealing with pandemics. I wanted to highlight next some of the work that GloPID-R has done during the pandemic. So this is a very high level overview of the kind of activities that we have coordinated in the last 2 years. Starting with February, a month and a half into the outbreak, what at that time was an outbreak in China, where GloPID-R and WHO brought together over 400 researchers from across the world in a global research and innovation forum in Geneva. And from that came the coordinated global research roadmap, which has become sort of the overarching roadmap for research in COVID-19. A few months later in April, we actually worked very closely with the UK funders to put together what is now known as the COVID-19 Research Project Tracker. And what this tracker does is it has basically tracked research funding and investments across the 9 priorities that were highlighted in the Global Research Roadmap from the WHO. And I get into this a little bit more because it'll give you a glimpse of the kind of work that can be done using these kind of trackers. And then 6 months into the pandemic, we organized a series of research meetings to basically identify what were the emerging themes of research in vaccines and therapeutics in a number of different areas. And then towards the end of the first year, we actually, as long COVID was emerging as a major issue, 8-9 months into the pandemic, we organized a forum to understand better what are the issues in long COVID, from which came the research priorities for long COVID, as is shown in this commentary, which was published in Lancet. Early in the second year of the pandemic, in March of 2021, as I said, identifying the low middle income countries' participation as an issue, we actually put together a meeting which was really driven by LMICs to identify what are the research issues that GloPID-R consortium of funders really need to focus. So this is, some of the major issues were identified and are forming sort of the main focus of GloPID-R as we move forward. And then through the summer, GloPID-R worked to identify some of the major issues from the point of view of funders and what are the recommendations for research as we were closing on the second year of COVID. So these recommendations really form sort of the basis of a lot of work that GloPID is doing currently. And then finally, based on a project called COVID Circle that was focused on LMICs, we just published a report which is really about learning from COVID Circle, about how can we take lessons from COVID and apply it into the future. So these are some of the highlights of the work that has been done by GloPID in the last 2 years. And now I'll go into a little bit more detail into some of these projects and some of these work that has been done. Starting with this research project tracker, which was a shared work with UKCDR, the consortium of UK funders, and GloPID-R. And as you can see on the slide, that the research project tracker is really a database of funded research projects on COVID-19, which really helps funders and researchers identify research gaps and opportunities and informs future research investments. And you can see on the right what the snapshot of this looks like. So here's the 9 WHO research priorities, and you can see, based on the sub-priorities within that, how much money has been invested in each of these priorities and each of the sub-priorities. And based on that, you can basically identify some of the gaps that are there. Currently, the project tracker has more than 13,000 projects that have been funded by more than 200 funders across 140 countries to the tune of close to $5 billion. And it really is we found that it was really an enabler for collaboration and coherence. And this whole project is continuously live updated so it's a living systematic review that's published in the Welcome Open Research. So if any of you are interested, you can go to either UK CDR website or GloPID website, or look at it at the Welcome site on this open research. One of the areas that was identified because of this research tracker, and that's what I'm highlighting on this slide, is that there's a very huge disproportionate funding that is happening across the global north and south. So you can see that of the 13,000 projects that were funded, more than 9,000 of those are really in the high income countries, and less than 3,000 or just above 3,000 are really in the low middle income countries. This situation has improved. A few months ago, when I was showing this data, it was less than 1,000 projects that were funded in the low middle income countries. This is what prompted us to hold workshops to get a better understanding of what kind of pandemic preparedness and research is needed in low middle income countries, to allow GloPID-R investors, funders, to really think about investments into building capacity in low middle income countries. And that's really where we are going in the future directions for GloPID-R. Again, you can go on the GloPID-R website to see the details of this, but I'm going to focus on the right side of this slide to basically highlight that the immediate actions that we are really pursuing at this point. The first one is to take that COVID-19 funding tracker and convert it into a pandemic tracker, which aligns with WHO's list of priority pathogens. Many of you may be familiar with that. And that's a project where we are now starting to develop and convert the COVID-19 tracker into a pandemic tracker. We're also looking at joint funding mechanisms similar to some of the other large funding models that are global models of funding, such as the GACD or the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases, where multiple funders from across the globe can participate in not joint call, but coordinated funding calls on specific topics. So we're exploring that model. As I said, strengthening coordination of clinical trials is a really important priority. And at this point, GloPID-R is working very closely with G7 and UK DHSC to see how GloPID can participate in the clinical trials charter implementation. As I said, one of the biggest focus for GloPID at this point is the focus on LMICs to make sure that we can expand GloPID-R's membership into low middle income countries and bring them under the fold so that we can work in a coordinated manner. And it's in that priority that we are trying to develop regional hubs to strengthen regional research networks which are aligned to pandemic preparedness and pandemic response. And I'll talk about South Korea's really important initiative in this area. The one final thing that I want to point out is that there is intention to pull together a One Health working group because we all recognize, given the zoonotic transmission that we have seen multiple times now, that we really need to prepare for pandemics through a One Health lens. So I think this is my last slide, where I want to discuss a little bit about the regional hub strategy, which came out from the discussions of the scientific advisory group. And based on that, the GloPID-R co-chairs have now decided to implement this regional hub strategy, which is really to take GloPID-R's capacity as a meta organization, so an organization of other organizations, and grow it into different areas geographically so that we have hubs that are focal points that can organize research framework, capacity framework based on very regional priorities. And I'm very grateful to the Korean Research Institute of Biosciences and Biotechnology, KRIBB, and Dr. Ryu, who's the director, who is leading this effort to pull together an Asia-Pacific hub of GloPID-R. And he's working closely with an advisory panel, which is being led by Dr. Shoji Miyagawa from the Japanese Agency of Medical Research and Development. So I really want to take this opportunity to thank both Shoji and Dr. Ryu for their leadership in this and for volunteering to help GloPID put this together as a pilot project to see whether we can implement this geographical hub strategy. And below that are some of the highlights of what the first year of work will involve in the Asia-Pacific region. Including gaining a better understanding of funding landscape in this region, the level of interest in establishing a regional hub, and if that goes through to start to identify what are the priorities for the Asia-Pacific hub. And then this will serve sort of as a model for other regions in the world. And we are thinking of a regional hub in the sub-Saharan or in the African continent, and another one in the South American continent. So that's kind of the plan. And again, big thanks to Dr. Ryu for his and to the South Korean government for providing funding and support to launch this pilot program. And with that, I will end my talk. And I don't know if there is time for any questions or discussions, but either way, I'm very grateful for your time and for listening to me.
Okay, thank you so much. It is really great talk, especially in your support for regional hub. It's really helpful to actually we negotiate with our ministry about this kind of regional hub, especially in Asian Pacific regions. So it's without your help, it almost impossible. So I'm really grateful for your support. So, is there any questions? If you have any question, please feel free to turn on the microphone and ask. Okay. Charu, can I ask a question? So,
For sure, yes, please.
in regional hub, I mean, we are already, I mean, think of and study this kind of project. So you already mentioned about the future direction. So in GloPID-R is a sample of the funder. So do you think we can try, I mean, establish a regional hub, and also we can try to pilot project? So do you think it's, the direction is very fitable of the objective of the GloPID-R?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Chuming. That's a really, really good question. And like I said, the objective and what we have seen in the last 2 years is that one of the reasons that the funding in LMICs is lower, even though we have global funders, and our consortium includes BMGF and Welcome and many of the other funders, including IDRC, for example, from Canada, that are global funders, is that we really need to build up the capacity of the LMICs. And it's exactly the same issue with running clinical trials in LMICs. So this geographical hub really goes to the heart of this problem, that we need leaders within the geographical regions who really understand the organizations, the countries, the culture, to really bring together countries and members who can then become part of that regional node. So there's discussions around regional issues, and different regions may have different issues that they can identify. So we really need to understand what the needs of that region are, and to basically then provide support and help, and global funders will fund the priorities that are identified locally. So that's the thinking, and that's exactly what the hope is. So I know that in the first year, you and the advisory panel and the KRIBB are really identifying, which is the first step, to identify who are the local partners, who are the local funding agencies or research centers, to pull them together to start that coordination. One of the things that we really have seen is that building relationships is so important to working in emergency times. So one of the reasons why GloPID-R was able to do a lot of work was that we were already talking to 32 members and coordinating with them and having regular meetings. So that made it a lot easier. So that's the hope, is that the geographical nodes can really start to build those relationships, understand the needs, and then hopefully we can execute a strategy to build capacity and networks and allow local priorities for research to be executed. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's already, I mean, on time. So I thank again, Charu. I mean, actually we meet in almost 11 hours later, because we have a membership meeting.
That's right.
in Korea, in Korean tonight in Korean times, but maybe in a different date in Canada. Anyway,
yeah,
I really appreciate
7 a.m. in the
your
morning.
presentation, and I mean, it was really great. Okay, thank you again,
All right.
Charu.
Thanks very much, and
Okay,
it's a pleasure.
bye-bye.
Hopefully one day I can be there in person.
Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. We are going to next speaker. Next speaker is Charles Waisonzi from South Africa. Because there's a big time difference, he recorded his presentation, and we are showing his recordings. In the Charles already mentioned about the LMIC working group. LMIC means low middle income countries. So in GloPID-R, there is many working groups. LMIC working group is the most active working group. So we are, because it's, as Charo already mentioned, Africa continental and a lot of the South Asia is LMIC. Because in this kind of COVID-19 crisis, the LMIC is a really important reason, because someone said is nobody is safe until everybody's safe, which means in case of the Omicron occur right now, so that is one of the unequal distribution of the vaccine. So LMIC working group, that's why it's very important. So Charles, he is one of the vice chair of GloPID-R and chair of LMIC working group. Actually, he charges South African Medical Research Council. He's a director. So he will give a talk about GloPID-R LMIC working groups. Okay, let's see.
Thank you for inviting me to talk about the GloPID-R LMIC working group. I am Charles J. Wisonge, Vice Chair of GloPID-R and Chair of the GloPID-R LMIC working group. The membership of the GloPID-R LMIC working group includes the South African Medical Research Council, the National Research Foundation of Korea, the Sao Paulo Research Center, the International Development Research Center, Canada, Welcome, UKRI, Medical Research Council, European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, European Commission, Institut Pasteur, African Academy of Sciences, and other members. Initially triggered by COVID-19 pandemic, the GloPID-R LMIC working group was created to support a coordinated approach to research funding towards epidemic and pandemic situations in low and middle income countries. The working group will enable input, alignment, and collaboration of GloPID-R members to support research in low and middle income countries, including coordination of funding for pandemic preparedness and response research, also potentially through establishment of regional GloPID-R hubs in low and middle income countries, coordination of funding for capacity building efforts and sustainability of research capacity, especially in inter-epidemic periods, also potentially through working towards a joint funding procedure. Encourage collaboration among research projects of different funders in identical location. Identifying local research priorities through an active dialogue with organizations or researchers in low and middle income countries and building on existing research capacity. Sharing funding opportunities for coordination among funders and identifying gaps, also through activity mapping. Sharing and aligning ideas and implemented rules on how equitable partnerships are guaranteed in funded research projects. Sharing and aligning ideas and implemented rules on access to medical interventions in government research projects. And sharing and aligning ideas and implemented rules on open and rapid data sharing among researchers with a focus on low and middle income countries. The support for coordination of research focus on COVID-19 relating to low and middle income countries is supported through a partnership between the working group and COVID-SEC, which aims at aligning and strengthening the global effort on COVID-19 research in resource-limited settings, including funder coordination through a joint principles approach identification of research priorities for low and middle income countries, and mapping and analysis of funding. Researcher-level coordination through communities of practice to support the research process, and facilitating learning for both funders and researchers through embedded learning and evaluation. And the four elements of this partnership are shown in this, including principles and priorities, mapping and analysis, researcher coordination, and learning. The LMIC Working Group organized a virtual meeting at the end of March 2021 on COVID-19 research in low and middle income countries, which helped to identify barriers to funding and implementing research in low resource settings. The figure to the right comes from the report from this meeting, which was published in The Lancet in May 2021 on research priorities and system needs for COVID-19 and epidemic research, response and preparedness in low resource settings. And it shows priorities for healthcare systems research, linked to private sector research and development, clinical research and trials, prevention, One Health, predicting pandemics, and cross-cutting issues. The key research gaps identified include clinical research on affordable, available, and deployable tools to diagnose, treat, and prevent COVID-19 in low resource settings. Assessment of direct and indirect impacts of COVID-19 on public health and health systems. Strengthening of disease surveillance, biobanking and sequencing capacity, and interdisciplinary research, the One Health approach. The collaboration with the COVID Circle has a component in learning, and the framework is based on 7 founder principles, including alignment to global research agendas and locally identified priorities, research capacity strengthening for rapid research, equitable, inclusive, cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary partnerships, open science and data sharing, protection from harm, appropriate ethical consideration, collaboration and learning enhanced through coordination. And we documented various lessons learned during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. These include that the global research response to COVID-19 over the first year of the pandemic was unprecedented. The global distribution of funding has been shifting with greater international and domestic funding captured for research across low and middle income countries. Both funders and researchers appreciated the early development of the whole blueprint and GloPID-R COVID-19 research priorities, although the delayed and in some cases lack of originally developed research priorities hindered their ability to align both funding and research to these. Many funders face multiple barriers to funding research rapidly in the pandemic, which were exacerbated when funding LMIC partners, and lessons can be learned from those who overcame these. Rapid funding and research were most easily facilitated through supplementing existing funded research activities and harnessing long-standing researcher partnerships and planning. Funders and researchers recognize the need for greater support for open science and data sharing practices in epidemics through ensuring trustworthy and equitable approaches, which have the buy-in and support of LMICs. This was highlighted as an ongoing challenge by researchers working on COVID-19 research across low and middle-income countries. Greater global funder collaboration is needed, including joint funding, to ensure that high-quality multi-country studies can be funded to address research needs during pandemics. The Strategic Advisory Group of GloPID-R produced recommendations and considerations for GloPID-R earlier this year, and the GloPID-R co-chairs made recommendations following this report from the Strategic Advisory Group. And one of the recommendations is directly linked to the work of this LMIC working group. And the recommendation states that GloPID-R should continue to expand its strategic focus on research preparedness and response in low and middle income countries. This is in line with GloPID-R's ongoing work. This is in addition to GloPID-R's ongoing work in the areas of data sharing, social sciences, and clinical trials coordination through its established standing working groups. The sub-elements of this recommendation include GloPID-R has an LMIC working group with active participation across its broad global membership, and this should be a key focus for future activities. Strengthening research preparedness and response through creation or alignment of regional clinical trial networks would be an aspect of this. GloPID-R should continue to expand its membership, in particular across the global south, and GloPID-R should further explore a possible evolution towards the creation of a network of regional hubs with strengthened global partnerships. I thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Charles. So it was a really interesting talks. LMIC is a really important topic in GloPID-Rs. Korea was LMIC for long times, probably in Korean War. So, but very recently, Korean the country reclassified as high-income countries. So we have the kind of duty to help the LMIC, especially in Asia. I think for me is I working together with the LMIC working group in GloPID-Rs. I learned a lot of the how and why we need to support in LMIC countries in Asia. That's why I'm really excited and established the Asian Hub, because this is one of the main objectives is to support and help LMIC in Asia to especially under infectious disease crisis, because it's a really important issues. So anyways, I really thanks for Charles' presentation. So let's move to next speaker. So next speaker is Sylvie Bryant, who is working on World Health Organization, simply WHO. She is the director of the Global Infectious Hazard Preparedness and also director of the WHO Emergency Preparedness. She directly involved in WHO R&D blueprint. This is one of the really good example working together with GloPID-R and WHO, because GloPID-R support many areas, especially in infectious disease field. So GloPID-R and WHO working together and make the WHO R&D blueprint, which is kind of standard and criteria what kind of research need to be done in COVID-19 crisis especially. So we will see how and what WHO R&D blueprint is initiated and made and spread. So let's give her a big hand and we'll see her presentation. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Sylvie Briand. I'm the director of the Global Infectious Hazard Preparedness Department at WHO in Geneva. And today I would like to present you a few slides on WHO R&D blueprint and some emergency program related research activity. So just an update on the current global situation vis-à-vis the COVID-19 pandemic. We have reached now 258 million cases and more than 5 million deaths. But the situation is very diverse across the world, and some countries are facing intense epidemics currently, while others are facing a more quiet situation and have reached also to maintain the virus transmission to low level. So the news in the recent days have been the emergence of Omicron, which is a new variant, and this variant has many genetic mutations and is quite different from the Delta variant, which is currently circulating heavily in northern hemispheres. But these many mutations, we don't know exactly yet what will be the impact on virus transmissibility, disease severity, on the immunity of the population and the potential reinfection with this variant. We don't know also what will be the effectiveness of available vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. It seems that public health and social measures, such as personal protective measures, are still working quite well and will be certainly an important tool in our toolbox to control the spread of this variant. But what is important to remember is that this situation is an evolving situation, and it requires constant monitoring and constant knowledge gap fillings, which means that the input of researchers are really important at any time, just to make sure that we can assess properly the situation and also make sure that the tools and the countermeasure we have in hand are still effective. The classification of this Omicron variant as a variant of concern aimed at accelerating the data collection across the world through enhanced surveillance and also to accelerate research on this new variant. So this slide is showing you the many epidemics and pandemics we had since the beginning of the century, starting with SARS in 2003, then H5N1, then H1N1, which was the first pandemic of this century, which was an influenza pandemic. But then we had MERS, we had Ebola, H7N9, Zika, yellow fever, Ebola, and now the pandemic due to COVID-19. This slide shows that these emergence or re-emergence are quite frequent because nearly every year we have some kind of global event to deal with. Most of the time we manage to contain them where they have started, but sometimes we unfortunately have to face a widespread dissemination of the disease and then put in place more stringent measures to control the spread and the impact on health and societies. But on the bottom of the slide, you see that very often we have been able, as the global community, to develop tools and agreements that enable us to better manage those events. And so it was the case, for instance, with the International Health Regulation in 2005, that drive the coordination between countries during such emergencies. The PIP framework in 2011, which is focusing on preparedness for influenza pandemic. And in 2016, the launch of the R&D blueprint, which is the agreement that we are interested in currently. So for many years, we had a number of discussions about research in emergency or of emergency. Because we had this double interest. First, we need research for emergencies, which means for outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics. And this is why the R&D blueprint has developed a list of priority pathogens for which we try to accelerate research on vaccine diagnostics and therapeutics for those pathogens. Because most of the time, these are rare pathogens, but if they happen to start having sustained human-to-human transmission, it can become a real catastrophe. So those pathogens are, for instance, MERS, Lassa fever, Ebola virus disease, Nipah virus, and so on. But we also need research during emergencies, for which we have very specific characteristics for this research. We need first it to be very timely, because time is the essence. We need also to have a proper funding channel because it needs to be proposed, the research proposal needs to be very quickly accepted. We need also to have specific modalities for publication because we cannot wait 2 years until the study is fully reviewed to have the results. We need rapid results, but it creates some challenges in terms of good practice in publication, of the quality of the publication, and of the need for peer review, but which is sometimes very difficult in emergency. Then we need a lot of global coordination, especially for pandemic, because the pandemic is by definition something that affects many countries. And so the coordination of research across different settings is absolutely essential. And I will give some example of that. Then we need partnership because WHO by definition is not a research entity. And so we are not doing research ourselves, but we collaborate with many partners across the world who are doing research. And then we need, of course, a rapid translation of science into policies. It's not only good to have scientific articles published rapidly, but we need policymakers and decision makers to take into account the results of science in their policies and in their, especially, response to epidemics and pandemics. So the R&D blueprint is not a legally binding agreement. It's more a global strategy and a preparedness plan that allow for rapid activation of R&D activities during epidemics. And its aim is to fast track the availability of effective tests, vaccines, and medicines that can be used to save lives and avert large-scale crises. So under the R&D blueprint, there is a lot of planning for new research for or specific research project. There is a lot of coordination because R&D is also driving the development of roadmaps. And for instance, during this pandemic, target product profiles for vaccines or therapeutic and generic protocols also have been developed to enhance a good coordination across different settings. It's also R&D blueprint convenes a number of research meetings and research discussion so that all experts from around the world can be invited and contribute to this global discussion. And we have created a number of networks that are gathering data and also sharing information and analyzing this information real time. For example, networks of laboratories or networks of clinicians. We have currently 80 clinicians regularly meeting and exchanging information on what COVID-19 disease look like, what are the treatments that seems to work, and to share protocols for research as well. So the R&D blueprint has been activated since the beginning of the pandemic, and already in February 2020, WHO convened the first Research and Innovation Forum in Geneva, where we developed globally a research roadmap and strategy that has been since then in practice and implemented, and we are regularly reviewing it to make sure that we are still pertinent in our orientations. So you can find on our website a number of tools and reviews and dashboards that enable you to know what is going on in the world. And you have, for instance, this dashboard on global research on coronavirus disease. And this database is monitoring the various research projects that are in the world and also the protocols that are existing. And we have also many reports of consultation that were organized since the beginning of this pandemic. For instance, the Unity study, and I will talk a little bit more about those studies, but also a coordinated research global roadmap, solidarity trials, and regular update on the global research agenda through global research and innovation forums that are happening regularly as well. So, for instance, you can also find on our website the COVID-19 vaccine tracker, and that tells you how many vaccines are in the pipeline, whether it's in phase 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it helps us also to understand what are the different vaccine platforms and what are the results of the clinical trial as they become available. Regarding the Unity study, this is an interesting story because for influenza pandemic, in fact, as part of the global preparedness, we prepared research protocols that were important for, in case of influenza pandemic, to rapidly have research during emergency. And so this research protocol, as you see on this table, can look at community infection, community transmission, household transmission, vaccine effectiveness, health facilities transmission, school transmission, or impact on maternal and child health. And those protocols are important because they are standardized, they are developed with many research groups around the world. And so when the pandemic started, we have used those protocols and adapted them to COVID-19 pandemic. And it was very useful to have a view of the pandemic and being able to compare results as well between countries, because as you may understand, the capacities for research are very different across the world. And if we let every research entity to develop its own protocol, it's interesting. But then we have real difficulties during emergencies, of course, to compare results. So this standardization of protocol helps us to get better data and faster. So I would like to finish by highlighting few important new areas of research during emergencies that this pandemic highlighted, and we think that in the future, in the R&D blueprint, we'll need to add certain topics in the R&D blueprint, because we understand that this is really important during emergencies, and it's a little bit beyond R&D, but it's still very important for fighting pandemics and epidemics. And those areas are infodemic management, and I will talk more about it, but also all the research on public health and social measures, for instance, mass gathering, mask, physical distancing, transmission of respiratory pathogens, etc., which requires a multidisciplinary approach, including social sciences, for instance, but also trying to understand the impact of the context and contextual factors on the effectiveness of those measures. And so we do have now a full team at WHO working on this and trying to develop with different research entities in the world better metrics to measure the impact of those measures. Thirdly, science translation. We have seen during this pandemic a huge difficulty to translate science into policy. And so we need to improve on that. and hopefully next pandemic we'll have better tools to translate science faster probably, and this will help us also to better manage pandemic. One Health is also a new area. Most of the emerging pathogens are from zoonotical regions, so we need to better understand also how those viruses emerge and spread. And so for this, we need to work with animal sector, but also environmental sector, and trying to understand really how we can prevent pandemic in the future. And finally, we have seen a lot of difficulties in the governance and equity. So this is not really on the remit of R&D blueprint, but it's certainly topics that are really important. And we are also reaching out to different kind of researchers to help us to better understand how we can improve governance and also equity during pandemic, especially equity of access to countermeasures. So I will just highlight the infodemiology and also a few words on science translation. So the infodemiology is a new scientific discipline for infodemic management, and it's based on the observation that during acute events like a pandemic or an epidemic, we have an infodemic, which is a tsunami of information, some accurate, some not, that spreads alongside of an epidemic. So we cannot eliminate infodemic, we can just control it and manage it. And so this is why it's so important to improve our knowledge of infodemic so that we can have better countermeasures for the infodemic. And we have seen that infodemic not only can kill people, because we have seen rumors, for instance, of the miraculous cures that have killed people, like the methanol in Iran at the beginning of this pandemic. But also we have seen that misinformation generates mistrust, and this mistrust can affect governments, public health authorities, but also science. And so it's very important for scientific community to look at this infodemic and try to manage it the best way we can, so that we can continue to leverage scientific assets for the epidemic response, and make sure that science will continue to help us to better manage those events. So managing the infodemic is critical, and we need to look more into it. And also, what has been particularly striking during this pandemic is that the new technologies which help us to disseminate accurate information have also increased the speed and the spread of misinformation. And so we need also to take into account this new factor and the fact that we all live in a virtual world as well as a physical world. And so we cannot just assume that previous techniques and approaches will continue to work in this new world of virtual communication. So we need to accept this and work on it so that we can improve our way of doing things. But the new technologies have had an enormous impact on scientific communication as well, and sharing of scientific knowledge. And here you have two examples. In the beginning of the 20th century, when we had the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was a paper printing encyclopedia, there was 1,500 contributors, 40,000 articles. It was only in English, and it was very well known and used. But now with Wikipedia, for instance, we have 40 million members, and it's in 304 languages, and they have 18,000 million views each month. So the volume, the spread, and the speed by which science is communicated is enormous and unprecedented. And so if you add to this the way now scientists use Twitter and other social media platforms to share their knowledge, you understand that we are facing a completely different phenomenon. And so we have developed a research agenda for infodemiology, which is the science behind infodemic management. And we are looking at a number of key questions. the aim for us is really first to measure the impact of infodemic, and secondly, find good intervention to manage it better. And we need, of course, a matrix to measure not only the impact, but also the intervention so that we can improve in this very new field of research. And to give you an example of what we do, and we work with really a wide range of scientists, including physicists, chemists, mathematicians, data analysts, and statisticians, epidemiologists, social scientists, and so on and so forth. But one example of things we do, we try to understand how the information flow between networks and among networks. We have tools now to analyze the flow of information online, and we try to understand when we spread some messages, what is the impact on those networks, how many people can we convince, and how people, especially the undecided, change or not their behavior based on the information that we have sent through different networks. So regarding infodemiology, there have been a lot of articles already published, and we are already filling knowledge gap, and many scientists have helped, and so I think we are making a very rapid progress. And we have also had special issues in different journals about infodemiology, and this trend is accelerating, of course, because more people are now interested in knowing more about infodemiology. Regarding science translation, we have held a conference in June 2021 on this. It has had enormous success with 6,500 people registered from 159 countries around the world, and after that we had YouTube views by more than 15,000 people. We are collecting all this information, all this experience and good practices, and we will be sharing this through our networks and WHO website in a very short time, so that everybody can access this and improve in communicating science. So I've put also some resource in this set, and I hope it will be useful to all of you. And I thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye. And I thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Sylvia. I mean, unfortunately, we cannot ask any question to Sylvia, but if you have any question, please put any comments on the YouTube or directly email to us, so we can instead to email to her about the question. You know, one of the objectives of this session is to understand Korean scientists and people, how and what kind of working going on in outside Korea. So, I mean, in this kind of topic is the Sylvia's and Charles' presentation really helpful to understand why people how struggle and fight against SARS-CoV-2 so far. And let's move to next speaker. So far the speakers from the Canada and South Africa and Swiss, and finally we're back to Korea. I'm happy to introduce the Dr. Youngmi Ji, who is the CEO of the Institute Pasteur Korea, simply IPK. She has a really unique career. She work in WHO a little bit time ago, and she also have the very broad background on infectious disease. Today she will give a talk on R&D preparedness for global pandemics and Pasteur networks. Please give a big hand, and now your mic on yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu, for kind introduction. So it is my great pleasure to participate in this conference, and I want to thank Dr. Liu and organizers of this conference for inviting me to this session. I also want to apologize for that I was not able to join conference in person. So let me just share the slide with you. So it is my great privilege to talk about R&D preparedness for global pandemics and also cluster network. So my talk will include R&D blueprint, GloPID-R, and WHO's response to COVID-19. Although you heard from previous speakers, I will briefly mention because I was involved in those initiatives. And those will be followed by cluster network and IP Korea as an Asia Pacific hub. So as you also heard from Sylvie, R&D Blueprint initiative was created after Ebola outbreak in West Africa and also MERS outbreak in Arabian Peninsula and also in Korea in 2015. The reason that the R&D Blueprint was created to facilitate R&D before epidemic and also during the epidemic, so that the products of the research, such as vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, could be utilized while epidemics are still ongoing. So I was involved in the practice of the prioritized pathogens for the R&D Blueprint. So you can see the list of priority pathogens in 2017 here, and you can see the MERS was included and also SARS included and other highly pathogenic coronavirus pathogens. So you can note that the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 can be included here. And also there is severe fever with thrombocytopenia syndrome. And I actually proposed this pathogen because of its high mortality, as well as the potential for the human to human transmission, especially at nosocomial settings. And then the current list of the priority pathogens include COVID-19 and also disease X, but this list excludes the pathogens with existing control programs such as TB, influenza, dengue, malaria, and antimicrobial resistance. So what are the criteria for the prioritization of the pathogens? Whether there is a possibility of human-to-human transmission, or whether there is medical countermeasures, and also severity or case fatality rate, and also the animal and human interface issues, and some other contributing factors and public health context of affected area, and also the societal impact as well as evolutionary potential of pathogens. You heard from Charu about the GloPID-R. So GloPID-R is the network of funders in the field of infectious disease research. It coordinates the rapid research response when pandemic or epidemic occurs towards the systemic preparedness by connecting clinical trial networks and building a framework for data sharing and improving rapid delivery of research funding for the preparedness and response by discovering activities in advance of next outbreak and also in relation to recent outbreaks such as COVID-19. So obviously it is important to think, plan, and invest in research and innovation before any health crisis occurs. So you also saw this map that the GloPID-R has members worldwide, which include KRIBB, Dr. Liu as a director, representing National Research Foundation of Korea. And as you heard from Charu, the KRIBB is now leading the Asia Pacific region in terms of LMIC research. And I want to also mention that IP network is happy to join these activities in low or middle income country research. So from this slide, you can see the timeline of the WHO's action for the R&D as a response to COVID-19. So you can see how quickly WHO responded to COVID-19 in terms of research, although some people are blaming WHO for slow action, for declaring pandemics. But in fact, WHO has a right to declare public health emergency of international concern based on international health regulation. And international health regulation, based on that, WHO declared the emergency on January 30th. And after the declaration of emergency, WHO convened the Research and Innovation Forum on February 11th and 12th. And the coordinated global research roadmap was created with 9 working groups. So those 9 working groups have met regularly since then until now. So I think WHO's convening power played the very critical, significant roles in advancing COVID-19 research during last 2 years with global partners in terms of COVID-19 research. So from this slide, you can see the goals and 9 thematic areas of global research roadmap. So it has a goal, 2 goals to facilitate the research to overcome current outbreak, but also to support research priorities which can lead to development of sustainable global research platforms for next disease X epidemic. So you can see 9 thematic areas of the roadmap, which include epidemiology and infection prevention control, clinical management, therapeutics, vaccine and virus natural history and diagnostics, and animal environmental interface to find the origin of COVID-19, and also ethical aspect as well as social science. But some areas, there are also sub-working groups. For example, for vaccines, there are 6 working groups, including vaccine target product profile, animal models, assay development, and master protocol writings, etc. And in April this year, WHO also published research innovation achievement since last year. So you also saw this slide from Charles' presentation. So there are 9 areas, 9 thematic areas, and you can see how much has been invested for each area. You can see the vaccine is the area with the biggest investment, followed by clinical management. If you see therapeutics, there was relatively less investment compared to vaccines and clinical management. And you can also see that 8 immediate research actions listed here. And you can also see how quickly the follow-up action started. So action started right after the forum was held in February last year. And WHO is also implementing international pathogen surveillance network to enhance sequence capabilities for SARS-CoV-2. So WHO is saying the sequencing capacity for SARS-CoV-2 at the global level increased by 11% from March to October this year. So you can see some differences of sequencing capacity in each region. So if you see African region, there is less capacity. Despite of this situation, we know the Omicron variant has been quickly detected and reported to WHO. I think this really need to be recognized and commended. And you know that one of the 9 thematic areas is the research on origin of COVID-19. And these obviously need one health approach. So WHO, OIE, and FAO are very closely collaborating by sharing responsibilities and coordinating global activities to address risks at the animal, human, and environment ecosystem interfaces. And as you all know, antimicrobial resistance and zoonotic diseases are the areas with a One Health approach, and those areas have been evaluated by WHO Joint External Evaluation that Korea also participated in 2017. Now I want to move to PASTEUR Network and IPK as Asian Pacific Hub. So there are 33 PASTEUR Institute in 25 countries covering all regions of the world. So in Asia Pacific region, there are 10 institutes, including Korea, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Laos, Cambodia, and also there are 3 institutes in Vietnam, and also include Iran and New Caledonia. And there were also institutes covering European region and American region and African regions. So one example of activity in Asian region is collaboration on antimicrobial resistance. So the institute in Asia Pacific region has met a few times to discuss and identify the top priority subject as potential collaborative programs in this region. So those subjects are establishing common database and data repository system for AMR research in this region, and also strengthening metagenomics activities in this region, and also using natural products as tools to address AMR crisis. So what are the main assets of the network? So it is a diversity. So network has access to global diversity over large territories, as I shown in the map, and ecosystems. So we can conduct research on host and vectors, environment, populations, and pathogens. So we have various research activities in many areas. So the PASTEUR network is now undergoing major change in terms of governance. So there are 2 pillars. So there is foundation and also association. So foundation is financial entity as a dedicated legal vehicle managing financial assets by fundraising, working with donors and philanthropists. And association is operational entity that leads and executes vision, boosting synergies among different institutes and capturing opportunities by promoting networking and advocacy. So PASTEUR Network will promote global innovation hubs with the global and regional players for the global ambition and reach. It will capture more opportunities and deliver innovative solutions, and also addressing challenging health issues, and also translating knowledge into value and policies. So PASTEUR Network has dynamic and interconnected web of science and scientists. So examples could be data science and bioinformatics, and vaccination and biologicals and therapies. Some institute also has a capacity for vaccine production, and also some institute has epidemic intelligence, such as epidemiology and surveillance capacity. And some institute has drug discovery and reprofiling capacity. For example, could be IB Korea. So PASTEUR Network is very unique network of diverse platforms and hubs. So you can see some institute has the expertise in clinical research and the vector research, as well as vaccine production units. Some institute have, and biobanking and proteomic structural biology capacity, as well as drug screening, as you have seen in IP Korea. And most institute has actually biosafety level 3 labs, including IP Korea. So Pasteur Network has contributed to responding global threats such as dengue, chikungunya, Ebola, MERS, and also avian flu with the solid foundation in the field, and it has established a very close relationship with national health authorities as a recognized partners for outbreak response. So what about IP Korea? So IP Korea has been very proactive in COVID-19 therapeutics research by adopting a drug repositioning strategy. So we identified the 4 drug candidates, and those drug candidates currently has ongoing clinical trial in Korea as well as globally, including Senegal, Russia, and Australia, and India, and Mexico. So the clinical trial in Senegal is one good example of the close collaboration among Pasteur Network. We also have a strategy to develop novel broad-spectrum anti-coronavirus agent, including SARS-CoV-1 and MERS, as a collaborative efforts of medicinal chemistry team and genetic virus team, and also the screening discovery platform team. So COVID-19 also provided the opportunity for more collaboration with many partners at the national level or also international level, with many pharmaceutical companies and research institutes, universities, and also international organizations. I think this will grow in the future. So I talked about the WHO's R&D Blueprint Initiative and GloPID-R and also Pasteur Network as an example of global partnership. And we do know the importance of public-private partnership, and also bio-industries should be recognized as partners. And I think one good example at the global level is the Right Fund that you will probably hear from next presenter, Dr. Honey Kim. And we also know the importance of interministerial and interdisciplinary projects. And last week there was a meeting on consortium of infectious disease research institute in Korea. And I do hope this consortium could be really functional to launch and promote interministerial and interdisciplinary project in Korea towards the systemic preparedness. So for this systemic preparedness, it is very important to have research platforms for preclinical and research and clinical research, and also data sharing. And also there is a critical role of national regulatory authority, for example, emergency use authorization for preparedness for disease acts, as well as the response to current COVID-19. So in my last slide, I'm emphasizing the importance of the partnerships at the national and also global level to exit this pandemic as early as possible, and also prepare for the future pandemics through science. Thank you for your attention.
Dr. Z, this is really fruitful presentation. Actually, her presentation is include a lot of the information, especially in the importance of global networking, especially under serious condition of like COVID-19. So, if you have any question, any questions? So let me have a question. You already mentioned about the many global networks. Can you re-emphasize the importance of the international network, especially in the pandemic eras?
Thank you for the question. I think international network in the area of R&D really worked, I think, very efficiently during this COVID pandemic with the coordination of WHO teams and also GloPID-R and also many other initiatives. Before the pandemic, there was also some initiatives, and during pandemic, many additional initiatives were created. I think altogether, this really has contributed a lot to for us to have the vaccines. So those achievements to produce vaccine within 1 year is really I think historic achievement of the international collaboration. So I think the role of science is very critical. We all know, and we now even talking about we probably can shorten the time of the developing the vaccines and therapeutics to 100 days. So with those international networks, very close collaboration, I believe this kind of timeline to reduce 100 days might be also possible. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for nice your answer. So due to the time limitation, we need to move the next speaker. So, but we can discuss a little bit more at end of the panel discussion. Okay. Let's move to next speaker, Hani Kim, who is a CEO of a research investment for Global Health Technology Fund. Simply, we can say RIGHT Fund. Actually, it's originated from the Korea. In this pandemic situation, this kind of funding is very important because infectious disease is a very important, but it's very hesitate invested by government, invested by the individual, the industry, because I mean the benefit of the infectious disease, investment is not easy because it's in most case the funding and the benefit from the funding is not catchy to the end of the infectious disease. So that's why is a lot of the companies hesitated to invest in this kind of the field. But RIGHT Fund is already established the recognize this kind of the problems. So I'm really happy to introduce Hani Kim. She newly joined the RIGHT Fund, and I want to hear what kind of the vision of the RIGHT Fund, especially in COVID-19 situation. Please, Hani.
Thank you, Dr. Ryu, for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. Okay. I would like to thank again the organizers for inviting me to this important presentation. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I would like to focus on two key questions. The first is, what are we learning about the current pandemic, about the role of health technology research and development for health equity? And how does the RIGHT Fund, as a funder, aim to translate some of those lessons into practice? So I've structured the talk around three key points. I would like to give you a little bit of an introduction of what we are, why we were set up, and some of the lessons from the current pandemic that are relevant for us. And finally, what we are doing in order to translate those lessons into the RIGHT Fund's vision and execution. So what is the RIGHT Fund and why was this set up? So about 5 years ago, the Korean Ministry of Health, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as 7 Korean life science companies were very energized about the possibility of forming this construct because we saw an opportunity for both Korean government and life science partners to close what is now known as the 1090 gap. The 1090 gap was first used in a report published in 1990, and the report illustrated 3 key points. The first is, at a very high level, it demonstrated that 90% of the world's total resources spent on supporting health research and development, 90% of that total amount went into supporting diseases that affected only 10% of the world's population. And that 10% happened to be the 10% of the wealthiest population. In other words, less than 10% of the total world's health R&D spending went towards health conditions that affected the vast majority of the world's population. So that sent a huge shockwave through the health research field. And it really implied 3 things that forced us to think differently about how we fund health research. The first is resources and R&D capabilities are highly concentrated in the high-income countries. And if we were to leave health R&D completely up to the market forces alone, then that in fact would worsen health inequity. In other words, thirdly, if we want health R&D to benefit all, not just the wealthiest few, then we need a significant increase in public ownership and oversight for health R&D so that they can serve equity. And we were all very energized about the growing role of Korea and Korean government as a relatively young donor. As Dr. Ryu mentioned previously, we only recently became an official donor country since 2010 and became a member of the OECD Development Assistance Committee. So the Right Fund was launched with the hypothesis that Right Fund could serve as a platform to form partnerships between Korean and international life science researchers to develop health-related technologies to reduce health inequity globally. When the foundation was established, the initial funding amount was roughly $45 million that was supposed to be dispersed over a 5-year period. Our largest funder is the Korean Ministry of Health and Welfare, with the recent commitment from the Korean government to double its commitment. Korean government currently supports a little under 70% of the total funding, and the remaining fund is split between Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and currently 9 companies, but when we established, we had 7 life science companies as a funding partner. So over the last 3 years since the launch, we have invested in 38 projects. On your left-hand side, you can see the overall makeup of our investment portfolio. The total amount that has been committed is equivalent to approximately $37 million. Most of our projects that we fund are vaccine-related projects, as you can see on the right-hand side of the pie chart. So the vaccines make up 16 out of 38 grants, which is about 42%. In terms of the funding amount, the vaccines also make up a little over 60% of our total committed funding. After vaccines, there's been a huge enthusiasm around diagnostics, and that makes up our second largest slice of that pie. I would like to note that the digital health, indicated as DH in that pie chart, it looks like a small slice. It's our latest expansion of our funding scope, even though right now it represents a small number of projects that we are funding. We do anticipate that slice of the pie to grow based on the level of enthusiasm and applications from the Korean researchers. On the right, you see the spectrum of diseases that we've been funding. As you can see, it's a wide range of diseases. Our key criterion in terms of disease is that the diseases do correspond to areas of unmet needs in LMICs, such as the ones prioritized by WHO and other regional public health authorities. Just to give you a snapshot of what's actually in our investment portfolio, as well as the development phase of specific products that we fund. This is a busy slide, I apologize, but if you zero in on the right bottom corner of this slide, throughout the year, so far, we've been running typically 2 to 3 calls for proposals to give out 3 types of awards. The Product Development Award is our largest award. It disperses about 40억 or $3.4 million to be spent over a 3-year period. Those projects are usually late-stage projects that start from what I would call the late stage within the preclinical studies, for example, putting together a data package for IND submission, all the way down to regulatory approval and product registration. The supplemental funds we also award to our current recipients of the Product Development Awards in case they need additional support for follow-on studies to take it all the way to product registration. The Technical Accelerator Award is where we perhaps take the highest level of risk. These are the projects that we look at from all the way from proof of concept stage to regulatory approval. So those tend to be diagnostics or digital health platforms that have a relatively shorter development trajectories compared to vaccines or drugs. So as you can see on this slide, ranging from preclinical to WHO pre-qualification, we cover a range. However, for vaccines and therapeutics, you really tend to focus on the late stage, whereas for diagnostics and digital health platforms, we have been supporting projects that start from the proof of concept stage. Mainly because, especially for digital health platforms, this is so new, we would like to keep an open mind and perhaps have a higher risk tolerance to learn about how digital health platforms can be applied to promote public health and health equity. In the next few slides, I would like to touch upon some of the lessons learned from the pandemic that we all are very familiar with, and I would like to zero in on the one that particularly is relevant to guide the Right Fund as a funder based in Korea. So we've seen an unprecedented level of innovation, technological innovation in developing vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics during the last 2 years. And they've been incredibly effective in preventing and controlling COVID-19 wherever they are successfully implemented. The humbling lesson that we are learning right now is that technological innovation alone is not enough to ensure health equity. So as of September 29th, the COVID-19 vaccines, if you were to look at their coverage, the bulk of the world's supply has been distributed among the high-income countries. So you can see that more than 60% of the population in high-income countries were immunized with COVID-19 vaccines, whereas less than 5% of the populations in low-income countries were immunized with COVID-19 vaccines. So this ongoing vaccine inequity has raised some very difficult questions in the field that had always been posed in the field of international health. But those questions have really moved from the periphery into the center stage. So I quote some of the high-profile articles that were published in the Lancet in the last 2 years. These questions are, what is global health? And who really controls the global health agenda? And ultimately, who benefits and who's left out from from benefiting it? If you just zero in on the last 2 questions on the bottom, these questions challenge the current funders in health R&D to think carefully about what role we may have if we were to make sure that health R&D benefits, again, all and not just the wealthiest few. Some reflections on where, for example, COVAX failed, which was set up to ensure health equity. The Lancet described that COVAX was a beautiful idea born out of solidarity. Unfortunately, it has not materialized. Some of the key lessons that were pointed out, and this was mentioned by one of the earlier speakers as well at this conference, insufficient inclusion and meaningful engagement with LMICs, lack of efforts in expanding vaccine production through tech transfer and support for health systems. Some tough questions about, have we perhaps tilted too much towards corporate interests and not so much on the public's interests? Even though after the release of that 1090 GATT report, we thought that we had reconfigured it to gain a greater control by the public. Do we need alternatives to a product of the Western-led global health system to ensure equity? So as a Korean funder that's funded primarily by the Korean government, the Right Fund reflects on its role that it could play within this broader context. And we start by asking ourselves what we see as a unique opportunity for Korea to show up as an ally in the current global health R&D ecosystem. And I emphasize the word ally based on the sense of solidarity rather than a sense of superiority from some assumed sense of superiority, either culturally or technologically. Why do we believe that Korea has a unique opportunity? As was mentioned by Dr. Ryu, Korea is unique in that, on one hand, in terms of its economic and technological wealth, it is one of the wealthiest nations. And that aspect it shares with the majority of, if not all, of the other wealthy donor countries. What Korea has that the other wealthy donor countries do not have is our historical experience of poverty and the experience of being victimized by colonization. In other words, on one hand, Korea is a wealthy country with a high level of technological capabilities, but in terms of its historical experience, it has a shared experience with the global South. And the Right Fund believes that that presents a unique and extremely powerful opportunity for Korea to contribute to presenting an alternative model of international cooperation for health and health equity. So within the large frame of what Korea could offer as a relatively young ally in the collective effort to improve health equity globally, the Right Fund's goal remains the same. We would like to serve as a platform to catalyze international collaborations in health R&D. We support developing essential health technologies that have unmet needs but have little or no market incentives. We have global access commitment built in our grant agreements to ensure that there is equitable access to all funded developments. We want to support LMIC's researchers' efforts to generate evidence to define the gaps in and solutions for health technology and R&D in their local context through collaborations with Korean life sciences researchers. Through these efforts, we aim to increase the collaborations both in quantity and quality, as well as the geographic reach of those collaborations, so that we could ultimately contribute to enhancing health equity. Our approach, which continues to evolve as I've stepped into this role 2 months ago, is largely rests on three pillars. We do have an explicit focus on quality and equitable partnerships, both within and outside Korea. We ask that of our grantees, we are actively exploring ways to build that partnership into our evaluation metrics and reward metrics when we evaluate our grantees, so that our grantees, our Korean grantees, become increasingly more competent and comfortable and energized about reaching out to non-Korean scientists towards our collective goal. As a funder, we ourselves want to be a good partner, and we want to learn to be a better partner by reaching out to other funders, both in Korea and elsewhere, so that we can create synergy. Looking at the middle column of what's on the slide, we continue to focus on product development. Vaccines and drugs, we will continue to prioritize the late-stage development projects. And for digital health platforms and diagnostics, we will continue to perhaps set a higher level of risk tolerance and learn exactly what kind of application of these tools will best serve not just the Korean population or the wealthiest populations, but LMIC countries. Lastly, we are actively looking for ways to expand our funding scope so that there's an opportunity for Koreans to collaborate with LMIC investigators to generate evidence, to identify questions to solve with the tools that we wish to develop. And furthermore, we would like to think of expanding funding scope for direct grants and fellowships towards building capabilities to put these tools into practical use, such as vaccines. So in this area, there's a new, very exciting initiative led by the Korean Ministry of Health to position Korea as a regional hub for vaccine manufacturing training hub. And Right Fund is delighted to be one of its consortium members to work closely with the Health Ministry, and will look at our funding mechanism to see how we can best complement and create synergy with the ministry's efforts. I would like to thank both previous and current members of the Right Fund who have really established and the investment portfolio in the last 3 years, and our funders. Thank you.
you hear me? Now, okay, it's quite better. So we do not have much time, so it's better to have the panel discussion in a very short time with a very intensively. I'm really sorry about that, especially Dr. Kim. So if you have any comments and any question and anything, even though and because of limitation of the time, and you maybe shorten your comments and discussion in the presentation. If you have, you can continue, and Dr. G also, if you have any comments additionally, please you can talk a little bit more actually. So it's better to start with Dr. Kim. Do you have any more comments?
Yes, I know we won't have enough time to answer this question, but I would love maybe this group to gather at some other time to discuss this so that I can learn. One of the points that was raised by at least 2 speakers at this session was about a joint funding mechanism within this GloPID-R. I would be very keen to hear about what kind of joint funding mechanisms have been piloted within the network and how the right fund can meaningfully participate. We would be very keen to seek ways to participate.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Z, do you have additional comment?
I just want to emphasize again that we really need to work together in terms of the LMIC research activities, because IP Korea is trying to lead the Asia Pacific region in Pastor Network, and also GloPID-R. Dr. Liu is also trying to make the pilot project in Asia region for the LMIC for the GloPID-R activities. So we can definitely work together and create the synergy for those LMIC Asian region activities. And also, as I mentioned in my presentation, the consortium among the research institute in Korea should really work, and I hope that can create real collaboration, really functional collaboration among many different institutes. So those 2 points I want to mention. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Asia has already have a lot of pretty problems like historically and geographically is very positive and favorable condition for occurrence of the infectious disease. So we do have a lot of the population and warm weather, and especially in a lot of the health effort is connected in all of the countries. So once in epidemic occur in countries, very rapidly spread out around the world. This is the best case is COVID-19. I mean, this possibility is always containing in Asia. So that's why we need to very focus on this kind of collaboration. The current situation is very bad actually for me, because the collaboration between Asian countries is very weak. I don't know why, because many reasons maybe but especially in COVID-19 situation, we need to learn a lot of lessons. So without collaboration, individual countries a lot of the problems and risk is huge. So we already have the very strong rationale. We need to have the collaborate individual countries, especially in IP networks, and also Right Fund is really helpful for future collaboration within Asia, I think. Okay, so do you have any additional comments, and Dr. Kim or Dr. Z? No? I'm sorry, we have a lot of the technical problems because this is not a common situation in virtual meeting like this in Korea, especially in KRIBBs. So anyway, thank you for give really fantastic presentation and give a lot of the information for us. Okay, thank you. Now we are closing this session, and thank you for joining the attendance and the many speakers. Thanks again. Okay. Take care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for invitation. 감사합니다.
감사합니다. 수고하셨습니다, 센터장님.